Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're going to take a special early look at the upcoming Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 warehouse demo, and see how it compares from both a visual and gameplay perspective to other entries in the series, especially one of my favorites, Tony Hawk's Underground. Now, because I'm limited to only the initial warehouse level of the latest game, I'm going to only touch briefly on the visual quality improvements, commenting mainly on the environment, lighting, and effects. And I'll save a full breakdown of the visuals when the game fully releases early next month. Instead, I want the primary focus for this particular video to be on the feel of the actual gameplay experience, specifically what abilities are available, how the controls feel, and what features I'd like to see implemented in the future. So, let's kick this comparison off with a brief rundown of the game's visual design. This will no doubt be the very first thing you'll notice when booting up the demo. Not only do character models feature significantly more detail and polygons than their old 6th gen counterparts, but they also move more believably, with some nice new idle animations and a fully animated face. The characters in both Thug and especially Thug 2 look more like cartoons, with big bulky clothing hiding low poly models with flat lifeless textures. It was a big leap for the series at the time, but the characters in the latest game are unsurprisingly much more lifelike and impressive by comparison. Then there's the level environments, which have seen a pretty significant overhaul as well. The warehouse level has been recreated 4 times now, and this one really does stand far above the rest. First off, this is the first version of this map that actually looks like it's taking place during the daytime, with sunlight pouring in through windows off to the left side and casting nicely detailed shadows on the floor below. It creates an entirely different mood and tone, and really helps to give this more open impression of the environment that you never got before. The lighting even features some subtle god rays coupled with some light lens flare and dust particles to really give the area this old, musty, abandoned feel. In the very first game, the warehouse is much darker, with dim, flickering lights, and a thick black fog used to hide the ceiling. The colors are mostly a mix of gray, yellow, and tan, with lots of striped texture work. On top of this, there was also some nice effects like a puddle of water off to the side, that mirrors the opposite wall to give the illusion of a real reflection, along with plenty of product placement and graffiti scattered throughout. This theme was carried over into Tony Hawk's Underground 2, where the initial training level serves as both an homage to the original level in the series, only with more advanced geometry and a higher LOD, and an entirely new skatable area attached to the side. With the most recent remake, we have possibly one of the most unique artistic takes on the warehouse to date. It's richly detailed with lots of graffiti on ramps and some cool little details hidden throughout, like this scripted cat that will occasionally run past the windows outside, and this much more complex center rail that has a more industrial look to it. As far as placement of the ramps and rails is concerned, everything is laid out identically to the original warehouse. So there's no secondary warehouse attached to the side and no giant sprinkler system like in Thug 2. But considering this is a remake of the first 2 games, this makes perfect sense. Overall, the visuals look fantastic. I love the new global illumination, high quality shadows, and the use of screen space reflections for some of the puddles. This larger puddle off to the side doesn't look too great, and I think the spark effect for grinding is a bit excessive, but it otherwise looks great. But again, because this demo is so limited in terms of what we can really analyze, let's turn our attention now to the most important aspect of this remake, the gameplay. Now, if you're a big fan of the Tony Hawk video games, the best way to describe the way this remake plays is a hybrid of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4 and Tony Hawk's Underground 1. The controls are almost identical to the 6th gen Tony Hawk titles. So, you're going to be able to pull off all those trick extensions, double tap tricks, and even unique maneuvers like wall plants, spine transfers, and acid drops. As far as the game's average jump height and spin capabilities, everything seems fairly consistent with the classic titles. And it's still arcadey enough that you can even change direction mid-air if you wanted to. Thankfully, this system appears to be almost exactly as complex as the later Tony Hawk titles, with the full arsenal of standard tricks, along with a large number of trick extensions and combo linking mechanics mixed in. This means that on top of standard single-directional tricks like left and square to perform a kickflip, you can also tap square twice to perform more complex variations, like a double kickflip. Using diagonals works the same way, allowing for moves like hard flips, along with double tap variations like 360 flips. You can even perform triple kick and heel flips, though it seems to stop there, with no option for quad variations. Grab tricks are handled the same way, with more basic moves combined with more intricate double tap variations, and most of the moves look about the same as you remember. You can even assign additional tricks in the menus to use double input directions, like up, up, square, and so on, just like you could in the past. Next, let's check out how the grinds work. While all the basic grinds function the same way, with both standard directions and diagonals, along with both the blunt slide and nose blunt being assigned to the double input directions as always, it seems as though double tap grinds are not in this remake. I believe the reasoning behind this is that the special tricks from the original two Tony Hawk games included many of the same double tap grind tricks, so the 5-0 overturn, the hurricane, and the dark slide, for example, can only be initiated as special tricks when filling up the special meter. However, the problem with this reasoning is that the same is not true for double tap flip and grab tricks. The Christ Air, for example, was originally a special trick, but in this game is a standard double tap grab trick just as before. So I don't really get the reasoning for removing the double tap grind functionality when they could have just easily thrown in a bunch of much more crazy special grind tricks like one-footed dark slides to make up for it. It's a disappointing decision that really limits the variety of the grinds in the game, and one that can be easily rectified by incorporating double tap grinds into the default moveset option under the game mods menu, that could swap out special tricks depending on the mod selected. On the bright side, Tony Hawk 1 and 2 does include grind extensions, meaning you can smoothly change your grinds by double tapping face button combinations to help boost your score further. Which brings us to our next topic, manuals. Manuals were first introduced into Tony Hawk 2 as a way to connect combo lines between rails and ramps, and have become a staple of the franchise. But with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4, manuals were expanded upon substantially thanks to the inclusion of flatland extensions. Much like the grind extensions, players can tap face buttons to manipulate the board, jumping up onto the rail, performing handstands and pogos. Some of these extensions even offer additional connected moves, like a handstand board flip, or a pogo wraparound. And while all these moves seem to function identically to the past games, it seems as though a few moves are missing, like this Primo Spin, that can be triggered by quickly tapping the circle button. You also can no longer perform pivots while doing these flatland extensions, whereas you could do them in the past to add some nice rotations to your combos. Speaking of pivots, I also notice a minor error in the remake when it comes to safely landing a pivoted manual. In the older games, letting the balance bar fall towards the end of the board that's in the air will allow players to safely land their combo string, whereas letting the balance bar fall to the opposite side resulted in a bail. While this is still the case in the remake, the game doesn't seem to recognize the direction of the board after performing a pivot. So instead of bailing here like you should, the player just lands safely for no reason. It's a small mistake, but one that can have huge consequences, especially if players are trying to land a long combo on a manual. Next up, we have lip tricks. Once again, it looks like Vicarious Visions has really done their homework, and all the lip tricks and extensions function almost exactly the same way. There's both hand plants and board stalls, and the board stalls can even be ollied out of, allowing you to jump, perform a quick flip trick, and land back into it smoothly. Next, we have a few miscellaneous tricks to talk about. There's a lot of extra maneuvers that have been introduced to the series over the years, that greatly help with the ability to hold steady combo lines. The No Comply and Boneless, for example, are helpful for boosting the player's maximum jump height, while other moves like the Wall Ride and Wally can be used in connection with a flat wall surface to help players reach even higher heights. On top of these older moves, players can also perform wall plants again, a move that wasn't introduced until long after the original two Tony Hawk games. Both spine and hip transfers also make a return, despite not being introduced until Tony Hawk 4 and Underground respectively, along with the ability to perform acid drops. So far, there are a ton more moves than I had anticipated available in this remake. Basically, all the core moves introduced to the series over the course of the first 10 years have returned, though there are still a few exceptions. Pressure stances, for example, are not available, and neither are sticker slaps, carves, rolls, flips, freakouts, or the ability to dismount and walk around with your board to do a combo timer runout. But I could excuse all these missing elements if they would just add back in the spacewalk. For those of you that don't know, the spacewalk is a manual trick that allows players to swing the board back and forth slowly. It's a critical part of the manual trick set, as it is the only extension that can be used to move the player forward after coming to a complete stop. Without this, using any sort of extended flatland combo alongside other tricks feels useless, as it will completely kill your flow. Finally, there's the bails. Bailing happens when you fail to land your tricks properly, which seems to be handled a little bit differently in the new game. Thankfully, the rough-looking ragdoll animations used by Robomodo are nowhere to be seen in this remake, and just like in Underground, the skateboard is the only part of the bail animation that exhibits any real-time physics. But new to this remake is this strange rewind visual effect around the character model, allowing players to return to skating faster and circumventing the need to have the character retrieve their board. In the Underground games, the board would fly away using some nice physics, and a new board would magically appear, usually after rolling in from off-screen. But instead of copying Neversoft's method, Vicarious Visions decided to go a different route, with this new VCR rewind effect instead, that not only speeds up the recovery process when tapping X, but also affects the soundtrack, adding an additional reverb and lowering the volume temporarily. Feels a little out of place, but you do get used to it, and it really doesn't hurt the experience in any noticeable way. But I am disappointed that blood effects have been entirely removed, as the ridiculous amount of blood after bailing gave the series this more mature edge, however over the top it may have been. Another minor gripe I have is with the stance indicator in the heads-up display. While I like the look of it, it's a little confusing that the default stance is referred to as regular, while the alternate stance is called switch. This makes plenty of sense for a regular foot skater, but for goofy foot skaters like Tony Hawk, it's really confusing. I think changing this term to read Goofy Foot for all the Goofy Foot skaters in the game, and leaving the switch stance as switch, would help to address this problem pretty easily. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound and gameplay comparison. Here I'm going to try and land identical lines in 4 different variations of the warehouse. Which game do you think looks, sounds, and plays better? And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, I think Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 is shaping up to be a real return to form for this once great series. I have for years been playing Tony Hawk Underground, and remains to this day one of my absolute favorites in the series. But after games like Project 8, Proving Ground, Ride, Shred, and somehow, even worse, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 5, it really seemed unlikely we'd ever get a return to this style of gameplay again. But, just like with the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy, Vicarious Visions managed to recapture almost all the magic that made these games special. I felt right at home with the controls, and was able to pull off a great million-point combo almost immediately. Again, there's a few things I would like to see fixed, like the manual pivots correctly reversing the balance meter, the addition of the incredibly important spacewalk, and the addition of double tap grind tricks. But otherwise, this is a game that I think old school fans of the series will be pretty happy with, and I can't wait to play the full experience in a couple of weeks. But what do you guys think? Are you impressed with how this remake is turning out so far? Or is there something else you'd like to see changed or added before release? Let me know in the comments section, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos posted every week.